Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome back, everyone. We want to talk in this panel about some of the obstacles our veterans face, some of the obstacles certainly the wounded face, and the opportunities to empower those veterans. I want to start with General Pete Chiarelli, who I will say I have known since very early in the Iraq War. We went through a lot together. We have visited the wounded together. And Pete Chiarelli, since retiring as Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, where he was deeply involved in issues of post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury. I truly think no one cares more than Pete Chiarelli about the future of our wounded veterans, and he is now with One Mind, where he dedicates his time to continue to help those same veterans. General Chiarelli, I want you to talk about those obstacles and the health and wellness of our veterans as they go forward into civilian life.
Well, Martha, this discussion is a double-edged sword because we tend to, in fact, slap a label that anyone who is deployed for any period of time has either post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury, and nothing can be further from the truth. There have, according to the President's report, been 265,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen have come back from these conflicts with traumatic brain injury. There are 3.4 million Americans every single year that suffer some kind of head trauma. You saw the numbers of 2.5 million at 20%. That ends up being probably 500,000 folks, if you take those numbers as being gospel, with post-traumatic stress. 8% of the population, 8% of our population is expected to have post-traumatic stress sometime in their life. It's just not caused by combat. Most of the work that's been done to understand post-traumatic stress, quite frankly, has been done on folks, ladies, who have been sexually assaulted. 74% of women who are sexually assaulted develop post-traumatic stress. That's why I'm so happy that President Bush dropped the D. I can't even imagine telling a woman who has been sexually assaulted that because she has a reaction to a relationship after that, that she has a disorder. But as we talk about this, and quite frankly, I started talking about it because I didn't know what they were. I'd spent 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I came back, the docs put a slide in front of me that showed me that 37% of our most seriously wounded with a single disqualifying injury at 30% or greater had traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress in 2008. I didn't know what they were. I knew that I had some combat stress folks to get up and see platoons and companies that had bad days. I knew what my football coach told me about concussions, shake it off and get back in the game. So I began this process of trying to learn about it, and I found out even the professionals don't know that much about it. The only way we, in fact, diagnose these two things are with tests. 20 questions for post-traumatic stress called DSM-5, and a cognitive test called Glasgow Coma if you bump your head. So I think it's always important to put in context that yes, the numbers are great, yes, they affect service members, but the large majority of service members coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan don't have post-traumatic stress and don't have traumatic brain injury. That doesn't mean we don't need to highlight it and talk about it, because that's how you get people in to get the help that they need.
And for them to talk about it as well. Ken Fisher, who is the chairman and CEO of the Fisher House Foundation. I think everyone in this room knows what the Fisher House Foundation does for our veterans, and especially during that government shutdown, when you were just amazing with the families and supporting those families for those who lost loved ones. I want you, Ken Fisher, to talk about how important it is for the support of those families, the work you do, and the support that the families give the veterans in terms of success when they transition.
Yeah. We kind of get the veteran or the serviceman or woman and their family when their lives have been flipped upside down. Too often a call comes in, the family has to mobilize very quickly. They've got to get from point A to point B because that's what's done. That's what needs to be done. Can you imagine being in the hospital and not having your family there? So at Fisher House, we kind of facilitate getting to the bedside of the loved one through a myriad of our programs and services that we provide. You know, the families bear burdens and are subject to sacrifices that the average American has no concept of. We average Americans don't have any clue as to what happens to these families, especially at this time. When you think about what's going on in their lives, the world does not come to a grinding halt. Bills still have to be paid. Mortgages have to be paid. Children have to be raised. Schools. There's multiple trips back and forth that families have to make. The whole soldier, you've heard that term, that includes the family. So the family plays a very vital role in the rehabbing of the soldier, of the serviceman or woman, and even of the veteran. So Fisher House plays a role there. We've seen the families, we've seen the impact that the family has, so we get them very early on. And it's always very gratifying to know we played a role when the veteran comes out, ultimately, and does enter the private sector and does get employment. The ones that don't, we try and play a role there. We try and provide mentoring wherever it's possible. I make myself available as much as I can to do that. But then, you know, remember that there are other issues too. If a veteran does have post-traumatic stress, the family suffers as well. So what we need to do is, when we talk about education, we need to also educate the families. We need to make them aware of the signs, of the early signs of post-traumatic stress, so that we don't get into substance abuse, so that we don't get into domestic violence and the other issues that have become very, very, very much a part of the picture.
Thanks. Also with us is Wayne Robinson. You are a post-9/11 veteran yourself, yeah. Retired Command Sergeant Major, but more importantly for you right now, Director of Student Veterans of America. Yeah. Talk about your work and particularly educating those returning vets. The GI Bill is amazing. Yes. Some of those benefits are amazing, and yes, people aren't always taking advantage of that.
Thanks, Martha, and thanks for the opportunity to speak about the amazing young people that, as the president and CEO of Student Veterans of America, that I get to represent. And so, to start with a little bit of background on Student Veterans of America, or SVA. SVA started 6 years ago on 20 campuses because when student vets were transitioning, they saw that the college environment or higher ed was not prepared for student vets. We were older, we were much more mature. We had a different worldview than just coming out of high school than say, the traditional student. And so these vets met in Chicago, and we started on 20 campuses 6 years ago. And today we're on more than 1,000 campuses. I represent those 1,000 chapters with more than 400,000 student vets being serviced by our policy, our advocacy, and the work we do in delivering programs. And so some of the issues that are faced by student vets is, number one, being able to transition. When I transitioned in 2011, I actually had a team. I was very fortunate to be helped by General Pace and Katie Haddock, who's here with Wall Street Warfighters, and I actually had a personal sit-down opportunity with Leader Citron. But what I realized was that the majority of individuals will not have that. And we're about 25 years old when we're transitioning, at least those that we represent, and they don't have that transitional point. So there are gaps between where do I study, what do I study, and the arrival actually on a campus. And so what we've done heretofore is to be able to represent them once they get to a campus and in and through their education. But the issue is the huge gap that exists between those that transition and never make it to a campus. And I'll talk a little bit more about that.
And a little bit what President Bush was saying earlier, too, about how do you transition somebody out of, my last job was in a Humvee, or, tracking down terrorists, how do you transition that to the workplace? Also joining us is John Thiel. He's head of Merrill Lynch Wealth Management, which represents Bank of America and Merrill Lynch. I know we talked a little earlier about the private sector, but what challenges are you seeing, and what are you doing in terms of veterans, hiring veterans, doing whatever you can that's working?
Sure. Thank you. And we heard what the challenges are. There's a lack of preparedness. We know about the stigma. There's ongoing commitments to the Guard, to the Reserve. Every corporation designs benefits based on people who don't always look like returning veterans. And we end up trying to make veterans fit our structure. And what we're trying to do as an organization is recognize that that doesn't work like Wayne has, and bend our structure to the way they think and act. So it requires, let's take hiring for example, it requires a different approach. Now, one example might be internships. So if you're going to try to get an internship on a firm like Merrill Lynch or Bank of America, it's very competitive. The way that we go after the most talented folks, the veterans, is we created a different internship track that will be held off cycle, that will allow them the access and the exposure to see what life is like. So they get a sort of a no-risk, free look at what a career might look like. The onboarding process is different as we bring our veterans in about how they're going to transition into the workforce, and we recognize some of those challenges. We don't have all the answers, by the way. This is sort of our attempt to do it. We have unique training for those folks as well, but I think most importantly, the answers all lie within our people. We have 6,000 veterans that work for Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and they've formed a military support advisors group. They have the answers. The peer-to-peer interaction and learnings are probably the best approach that we have to continuing to evolve the process and how we can make sure that we have this be a successful transition. But the one thing that wasn't talked about that I think is important is we're doing this because this is a business opportunity for us as well as doing the right thing. Merrill Lynch, for instance, has had a 45-year history of hiring veterans very successfully. They transition very well into our roles as advisors for clients with the maturity, the perspective, the leadership that they have. And so I look at this as an enormous opportunity. I think the challenge, and maybe we talk about it at some point, is how do we gather up all the resources to make it more seamless? I've met 4 people over the last 24 hours that are going to help me do this a lot more effectively, and one's sitting right here next to me.
Actually, that's exactly the point I wanted to make. So you've got all these people up here, you've got all these great ideas, but connecting those dots and making it work, how do you do that? I mean, it seems to me, just from the conversation and experience, that this all starts while they're still in the military. They don't really get that transitional help, or they get 2 days of transitional help and maybe nothing more, that some people fall through the cracks. So each of you just talk about your ideas, if you will, about how you connect the dots to what you're all concerned about. Do you want to start, John?
Sure. So I'll say 2 things. One, while they're in the military, we have this military support advisor group. We have full-time staff teams assigned to working with the military, working with military support organizations to identify that talent that's coming out of their service. And so we have a structure around that. That's one way to do it. The other way for us is to plug into Wayne's organization as we think about these campuses. And I happen to go to Florida State University, which has a robust veterans center, and I'm impartially proud of what we do. But that's a great opportunity for us to identify talent. So the combination of the structure we've put inside our organization to attach directly to the military, as well as our just ongoing recruiting efforts on college campuses, especially those that have established veterans centers, gives us a big advantage.
Let's just go down in the order if you can.
What I'll say is, as I look at the issue, and we talk about the greatest generation, right? And we know that the stats exist. We can talk about the 500,000 scientists and engineers that came out of that generation. 14 Nobel laureates, 3 presidents, 3 Supreme Court justices. But if you peel that back, right, they look just like our vets. They were guys from small town America. And so when I look at that picture and I look at the picture of the vets, I see connection being the issue. And so at SVA, we're actually redoing our IT infrastructure. So what we want to be able to do is have employers that are interested in reaching out to vets, and this is something that John and I talked about last night, interested in connecting with vets, be able to connect with them directly on campus. Because at the end of the day, the individuals, the recruiters, need to be able to directly access those vets at Florida State, at Purdue University, to be able to have that robust and dynamic conversation. So in about 4 months, we'll have that infrastructure in place, and that way we're out of the conversation. They'll be able to reach out directly, and then the vet will be able to put a face to the name of the organization.
You know, we've been hearing a lot about the veteran and the transition process into the private sector. Imagine if the veteran is wounded. Imagine what happens to that veteran, that serviceman or woman's life. They still now have to overcome their wounds, which they do with magnificent grace and dignity, and I see it every day. But they have additional challenges, and so do their families. So in my mind, while they are doing their rehabbing, while they are still receiving treatment, is to get to them at that point. Mentor, let them know what's available, make them aware of what they need to do, because they do have additional challenges now. It's not just walking out of the military and into the private sector. For these men and women, the additional challenges are many. So get to them. You know, we used to say there is still this benefit gap, as we're all aware, that during the transitional process from the DOD to the VA. That's the time, you know, I'd like to see the mentoring process begin. Let them know what's available. Let them know what will be expected of them. Give them an idea as to how they can brand themselves, how to put a resume together. Use that time while they're improving themselves towards making them competitive, giving them an equal, leveling the playing field, if you will, for that particular serviceman or woman.
General Chiarelli, you have seen some very specific things on the transition, not only out to civilian life, but just what Ken Fisher's talking about. The transition from DOD to VA is not that simple.
No, it's not. It's not. And those are some of the things we need to we need to fix. And you don't know when you're in DOD that the transition to VA is going to be difficult because you've never been in VA before. We have things like drug formularies that aren't the same between DOD and VA. So a kid has post-traumatic stress that's treated with an antidepressant that's 40 years old. He finally gets on the right dosage with the right drug, transfers into the VA system, and the VA has a different drug formulary, and they tell that young man or woman, I'm sorry, we cannot prescribe you that drug. They're faced with one or two choices. We don't have that drug in stock because our formulary is different. DOD has a much more expansive formulary than VA's. VA's is very, very set. And it's got nothing to do with the VA docs thinks one drug is better than another drug. Those are the drugs that they have to provide. So we have disconnects like that. We have disconnects like this great place that Arnold and Ken Fisher have built at Walter Reed National Medical Center at Bethesda. I'll be politically correct in how I state that. And you know, they do an amazing job at the NICO, National Intrepid Center of Excellence for the Study of Traumatic Brain Injury and Post-Traumatic Stress, of putting together a treatment plan for a young man or woman. And they leave there after 4 weeks with a treatment plan, much of it being experimental or really cutting-edge things. Go back to a place like West Point where they're relying on the Tricare network They go out into that network, and that network basically says, I'm sorry, we won't cover 50% of that which is on your treatment plan. Now think of that. We send them to a DOD facility, they get a treatment plan, they move to the insurance provided by DOD when doctors aren't available to cover them, and they're told, I'm sorry, 50% of what you are being prescribed, we cannot provide you because it's not covered by Tricare. So there are some huge bureaucratic issues here if we're really going to provide care, where we really need to do an end-to-end assessment, not an end-to-end in DOD, not an end-to-end in VA, but a total end-to-end assessment from the time you enter the Army until the time you are buried, to understand how to ensure that these two huge organizations are together and are totally focused on the service member, man or woman, throughout their career.
Imagine, if you will, if they live in a rural area and they have this prescription and they go to their VA, because the plan is to get them home as quickly as possible to aid in their recovery. But imagine if they go back to their VA in a rural area and they get the response towards the pharmaceutical treatment. What happens then? They kind of vanish. We kind of lose track of them.
You know, I didn't even know this existed when I was vice. I was in charge of Army medicine in a weird kind of way. I had no idea that this problem existed. But most veterans, when they're faced with that, because of the pain they went through in getting the right antidepressant at the right dosage, or the right pain medication, or the right sleep medication to handle the symptoms they have from traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress, walk out of the VA, find a civilian provider, get them to write the script and pay for it out of pocket. That's what they do, because they don't want to go through that again.
I want to touch on also what President Bush was talking about in the beginning, and it's media coverage. And it is, and I've certainly done this myself. We cover the homecomings and the heroes, but we also cover what you're talking about. We cover challenges, or we cover things that make all of the people watching think these people are victims. They don't want to be victims. We don't want them to be victims. I'm going to remove myself because I do think I understand these issues quite a bit. But how do you convince the country? How do you draw that line, General Chiarelli, that you want people to be aware of PTS? You want people to be aware of the wounded. You want people to be aware of the challenges, yet you don't want to paint people as victims. But we want to raise awareness, but don't want to paint them either as just heroes or victims.
Well, you start in forums like this, I hope, and you hope that people who hear this in here will take it out and tell it to their constituencies. But I don't really have the best answer for that question, because it is really, really a difficult question. I really appreciated the first panel, because I think it takes somebody from the top to force veterans employment. But when you get to the middle manager, the HR person who's faced with two files, and one person who's deployed 6 times and another person who hasn't deployed, and if you don't have a push from the top, I can't help but think that middle manager HR person is going to float on over to the person who hasn't deployed, because they read a story about some veteran that had some problem with his or her brain, and they're afraid. They're afraid, and they move over. It really does, in my opinion, take pressure from the top to get down in there and say, no, we're going to do things differently.
John, how do you talk to your employees about that? How does Merrill Lynch do this and do away with those stereotypes?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it wants education. First of all, we know that communicating with a lot of people is very hard. I could say happy holidays and not everybody will hear what I say. So it's really on this relentless education. One of the things very specifically we've identified, it's a program called Unconscious Bias, which we all carry with us, which sounds like this really does fit in this category, that we all walk around with tidbits, news bits that we file away that all of a sudden inform. And so you've got to be aware of it, one. So we actually are taking our leadership team through this. This would be in the category of it, but I think it's education. And what President Bush did for me really helped me because he talked about diabetes. And I think about that. My aunt suffered from it. She went in a lot of diabetic comas in front of me. And my assistant that I worked with had really severe childhood diabetes. And one day she went into a coma, and I recognized it, and we were able to call. And I think about that as a work issue. No one talked about it. She has an incredible leadership career now with our organization, but why is it any different? So I think the statistics that you shared about head injury and post-traumatic stress isn't unique to combat, it's unique to life. And I think that education process would be one way we would go at it.
When we talk about a bridge from military to civilian life, I know I end up talking to my military friends, and I will often say, do you have any civilian friends? So what responsibility, and I'm going to ask you this, Wayne, does the military have to sort of bridge that gap as well?
Okay.
To help you reintegrate, to help you say, I am part of this, I had an incredible experience that none of you may be able to understand, but I also need to take responsibility for that reintegration.
Well, I could actually speak on that for quite a while. When you look at the investment, when you say we're going to take America's best sons and daughters, and we're going to put them through a process, and we're going to make them the absolute best warriors where they can deploy anywhere around the world, be self-sufficient, hit the ground. If there are 10 steps, only be able to answer one of them and figure out the other 9 once they hit the ground. That's pretty amazing, seeing as how they came in at 18 or at 22 from as an officer. And then, so after that huge investment, to turn them into this amazing warrior that's able to support the country, fight anywhere around the world and win, that's very important. And then we look at the investment when it's time for them to come out. And so if you compare the two investments, then obviously there's a lot more that we can do. So how do we, as Ken spoke earlier, how do we rebrand that 22-year-old that we just told nothing was impossible to him or her, that we can do all of these things? If I could also address the previous question about conversation. What we want to be able to do is to change the conversation for the veteran in higher education. And we want to do that quantitatively. And we want businesses actually to be selfish when they approach us and ask, what is the ROI for hiring a vet? And so when we're working with
return of investment, okay.
Yes, return on investment.
And I got it, okay.
Sorry. What is the return on investment for hiring a vet? So when we look at IVMF from Syracuse University, we've partnered with MFRI, Military Family Research Institute from Purdue University, and we want to prove quantitatively that if you hire a vet, this is your return. So if we look at World War II, we know that for every $1 that was invested in a vet, $7 was returned to the economy. So that's the conversation we want to bring to business to reshape how student vets or how vets are viewed.
Anecdotally, I can tell you that we have a higher success rate with veterans than with non-veterans in our development program. So we can talk about it later, but we have some data.
And that's what we want to be able to get out.
There's also the data of unemployment is higher. And General Chiarelli, can you address that? Why
the unemployment
you think that is?
I think DOD is doing its best because it costs them money when people come out of the service and are unemployed for a period of time. They have to pick up the unemployment benefits for 1 year. That was about an $800 million bill that I had when I was vice. I think it's gone down a little bit now, but they are working very, very hard on the transition assistance plan, what's commonly known as TAP, with VA to prepare better. I'm very, very pleased when I hear things like that database and data is being turned over to employees. That's huge. I sure couldn't make that happen, or I couldn't find the right lawyer to make that happen when I was where I was. So those things are all great steps forward. But I think we need to go further than that. I had a discussion with a friend of mine in here before. Why don't we require everybody to do a LinkedIn profile before they leave? And I immediately My good lawyer training said I can't do that because that is a privately owned organization, and if we were seen as favoring LinkedIn over anybody else, we'd be in trouble. But, you know, it's those kinds of modern things that are available today. I think we need to make sure that we get them in the hands of the veteran, but more importantly, in the hands of that HR person far earlier in the process than we do today.
So if you all had to prioritize right now what you should do first to help make this process work better, of transition or of employing or of reaching out to students to get, to veterans who are students to get an education, how do you prioritize? It's hard, right?
Yeah, to me, so we've hired 4,000 veterans over the last 3 years and plan on hiring another 10,000. My priority in achieving that outcome for our business and for those veterans is really to connect better with the organizations that can provide me that talent pool, that can associate us and can point out those skill sets, because it just saves a ton of time for everybody to do that. So my priority walking out of here is to do a very good job of connecting with some of the people I've heard here, put our team in place so that we can operationalize a much more efficient approach to the recruitment and identification of veterans.
I want to eliminate the 20%. I'm focused on the minority. I'm focused on those who are affected. So I'm kind of different in that way. I want to understand post-traumatic stress. I want to be able to tell with certainty that someone has post-traumatic stress, not by asking them 20 questions. And I want a demand that we treat today's veterans better than we treated other veterans who we know had post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury from every war we've ever fought in. And we are about 40 to 50 years behind in doing the research and connecting the dots that need to be connected to find answers to help that 20%. And if we did that and could really clear up this mystery, and it really is a mystery. It's a mystery to everyone. It's even a mystery to the professionals, and don't let them tell you otherwise. If we could clear up this mystery, we would go a long way in helping, I think, veterans' unemployment by taking away this aura of uncertainty of people, you know, having traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress, doing things that we don't want them to do.
And how much improvement do you, both of you, think there has been in terms of removing the stigma? Because it's certainly still there.
Yeah, it's still there, and I don't think, I think you're gonna have to stand this forever, but this is a society's problem. We take your young men and women. You don't like talking about suicide. We concentrate on military suicide every year. I had 160 to 170 active component Army soldiers in the 4 years I was vice commit suicide every single year. 38,000 Americans commit suicide every year, but we were focused on that 160 to 170, in my case, Army soldiers. We ought to be focused on the large numbers. We ought to be focused on the 3.4 million people that are going to have head trauma every year. We ought to be focused on the $78 billion in direct medical costs that traumatic head trauma costs this country every single year, and getting rid of it. And we've got to increase a research budget to researchers who are going to research the right way by sharing their data. We've got to increase that budget, because I know with all the great CEOs in here that if you had a $78 billion problem and you were only spending $82 million a year to get at that problem, you would not be a CEO for long.
I think you want to say something about this,
I think, as General Chiarelli said, the stigma still exists, but there has to be, there has to be a starting point everywhere. And we've made this issue, we brought it out to the forefront that there is a stigma. So now it's up to the veteran, it's up to the serviceman or woman to come forward and get the help that's there. I think that it's time that we started working and focusing on what works instead of what doesn't work. I'm so tired of hearing about everything that's wrong. We know what's wrong, but let's start looking at what's right. Let's see what works in this country. Let's see what works as it relates to veterans, best practices, and bring that to light. And let's also remember that through this whole thing is the military family. And with sequestration and budget cuts, it's this segment of military society that will get hit the hardest. This is where we, as philanthropists, where we as foundations need to do a better job of hitting the issues, eliminating redundancy, honoring the donated dollar, fulfilling the mission that we have to fulfill. Because I think in the end, I think with everything that's going on, with all the cuts, with all the issues, be it stigma, be it wounded, be it jobs, it's the private sector that's going to make the difference, that's going to eliminate the gaps, that's going to lead the way forward. It's up to us to do a better job, to spend more money on our programs and not on promotion, on salaries, and so forth. We can do it. We just need to be more vigilant.
If I could tag along to what Ken was just speaking on, what we're doing and the issue that we think is very prevalent in the student vet area or arena is that if you were to ask anyone in this audience or outside of this audience, what are the graduation rates of student vets at a particular university across the country each year? So between 2009 and 2013, there was $34 billion invested into student vet education, to the GI Bill, right? And so if you ask the graduation rates, no one could tell you what those graduation rates are. Matter of fact, no one could tell you for the last 70 years what the graduation rates are. So very little data exists. So we at SVA are determined to partner with the best, the brightest organizations that are committed to supporting student vets and bringing them out of the shadows, bringing them out from just the portion of non-traditional students. So we've partnered, we're funded by Google has stepped forward, Lumina, a couple of foundations, and what we're doing is a project called the Million Records Project. And we're actually computing the graduation rates from 2000 to 2010 of student vets. And we're going to release that the first time in 70 years on March of this year. And then afterwards, we're going to compute the persistence rates, and we're going to demystify student vets. We're going to show you how well student vets are doing. So those of us up here on the panel understand this, but this is what we're going to get out to the American public so we can get away from the poor vet portion of the conversation and the handout and the and put us into the proper business sense and term as an investment in the country.
Coupled with the research that we're doing here, correct? Okay, I want to open this up to questions from the audience, and we are going to wait for the microphones this time. Right there, sir. Again, just if you can state your name and your affiliation, and if you want to direct your question to a particular person.
Father John Sheehan, I'm a Jesuit, that's Latin for troublemaker. My day job is I run the Xavier Society for the Blind. I'm here representing the National Association of Blind Veterans, for whom I am national chaplain. And I'd like to refine the focus a little bit. We've heard about post-traumatic stress, no D, and traumatic brain injury. Ken talked a little bit about wounded warriors who carry their wounds with them. And employers tend to back off when a vet shows up for an interview in a wheelchair, or with one leg or with one arm. The blind guy doesn't get to show up. Or if he does, he is quickly dismissed. Blind people can do almost anything a sighted person can with the proper training and equipment. I've ridden in a car driven by a blind guy. The car did not drive itself. And so I guess my question, my challenge is, what are we doing for the blind vets? Now that's a small segment, but in the last 20 years, combat injuries that affect the eyes have skyrocketed. DOD has created a whole separate department to deal with this. And as John said, companies have got to find ways to incorporate this.
John, do you want to take this question?
Well, I'll take it as a challenge because I can't really address that as specifically as you'd want, but I promise you if that's a bias, we'll address it. And because I agree with you, and we just have to check it out. Louis, I don't think you're going to get anybody who's going to disagree with you, correct? No.
So hopefully you'll do that, others in the room will do that. Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing that up.
People are invisible.
Thank you. Right behind you. And then we'll go to you.
Oh, I apologize. Hey, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Preston, Director of Veterans Initiatives for the Walt Disney Company. I'm a simple soldier wearing a suit. The one thing I want to comment on that we've discussed today is we've heard very big numbers, and numbers are in thousands and hundreds of thousands. But the veteran employment is one veteran at a time. And I offer to this room, with this brilliant crowd in here, if each person assists one veteran towards completing college, one veteran towards finding employment, we'll move 300 to 400 veterans towards a better life. And I just offer that to the group. I'm sorry, it's not a question, it's a statement, but panel, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. Anybody want to say anything on that? I think that's another, we agree. All of us agree, it's true, it's one at a time. And to that point, it really is getting to know veterans too. It really is knowing who's out there, who can offer their services, and there's so many, many veterans out there who are so extraordinary, who can do so many things, and just need a little push sometimes. The woman right there.
Thank you. My name is Nakima Booker, and I'm the chair of the Veterans Coalition of North Central Texas. We're a nonprofit organization that is comprised of 70+ organizations that all meet together every month, from nonprofit organizations to the federal government. And you talked about what are you doing? Well, that's what we're doing here on the ground. We're working together, and we come together every month to talk about the issues of our veterans and the veteran service organizations that support our veterans. But you mentioned a couple things, and I do have a question. You talked about research and the economy, increasing the funding for research, the gap in prescriptions and aftercare, private sector. Well, all of that goes back to our coverage for our veterans. Tricare is one of the most, pathetic coverages that is around. I have providers that call us on a regular basis and say, we can no longer be in your network because you don't pay anything. We can no longer see your veterans because you pay less than Medicare pays. And that is absolutely embarrassing. What are we doing before we talk about increasing the funding for research, or we talk about the prescriptions? If we don't have doctors who will see them, how can they even get the prescriptions? How can we talk about research? What are we doing to say we need to provide better medical care, better dental, better vision, better all-around health care for our veterans? And I'm talking about a
Let me take that question. Sorry, General Chiarelli, but you're going to get this one in your in your pastoral. There you go. Unless General Pace would like to come up.
One of the issues with Tricare is, in fact, its payment rate, and what we're trying to do right now is establish where that's having an impact. I'm sitting on a commission now, is looking at this whole thing. I know DOD paid out $16 billion last year in indirect medical costs. That is onto that Tricare network. I know they only did $8 billion worth of care inside our facility. So, 2/3 of our care is going onto the network. There are a whole bunch of things happening in healthcare today which are making it difficult and a $16 billion bill is something we're being asked to look at, to lower. I promise you that. I don't really see a movement afoot to raise Tricare payments. I really don't. But I think there's some things that could be done to help it. Number one, they're normally 5-year contracts. That contract is set. The services are going to be allowed or set for 5 years. That's why you have these problems like I talked about with the NICO. The NICO puts out some National Intrepid Center of Excellence. Okay. I said it the first time.
I'm just reminding.
Martha, come on.
I'm the acronym police, and I just, every once
that's one of the reasons. The problem I mentioned earlier is because the plan is set for 5 years, locked in concrete for 5 years, very difficult to change, and you have to wait till the next contracting phase 5 years later to include things like cognitive behavioral therapy for people with post-traumatic stress, that it's covered across the board. So I understand your issues. They are issues, and I can tell you the commission I'm sitting on is looking at all those issues.
Sir.
Hello, my name is David Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Dallas Military Foundation. I just wanted to touch on Mr. Fisher's point about best practice sharing, what's working. And so the commissioning that you're working on, General, to find best practices to fix these problems, I think is where we need to spend our time and energy and effort. One of the organizations I'm involved with is helping Children's Medical, a private organization, come up with, address a shortfall of $60 million in their budget and how they're getting paid. There are an enormous number of people in this audience and around the country that would be very, very happy to dedicate their time, energy, effort to volunteer to do operational excellence, process improvement projects, et cetera, for the VA if we could gain access for Tricare. The ability for people like the people in this room to volunteer, to give, to support, to give not only their treasure, but their time and their talents is one of the challenges. Gaining access to
volunteering is not always easy, and
Right.
it's not always easy for companies to take volunteers or anybody.
Or for the government.
Or for the government.
And I think I speak for all these people, they would love to help if we could find access, if we could be brought together, if we were given, I mean, when I heard that the Department of Defense was giving up data on how to access veterans and help them prior to their leaving, I was stunned. We did a project for 3,000 sailors and helped them shorten their cycle time of getting a job. We cut that in half. But the single biggest problem was how do we get to them? How do we help them? How do we engage them? And these issues around privacy was a big block. And then the issues of, hey, we're from the private sector and we're here to help.
Let's let Ken Fisher talk about that if you can. Is that about volunteering, first of all?
Well,
About people wanting to help.
yeah, no. I think volunteers are very relevant, especially when it comes to Fisher House. I mean, the lifeblood of our program is those who want to serve in any way that they can. They don't always have treasure. They have services. It's these kind of foundations. It's the ones I think, because I didn't really know if there was a question in it. So forgive me if I'm not answering or I'm not hitting your issue, but I think when it comes to volunteering and the relationship to Tricare, I wasn't sure about the correlation. But what I would like to say is that there are many ways that we can all make a difference. I know there's a lot of anger about Tricare, about potentially raising fees and so forth. I know that there's a lot of anger, about the quality of. Let me rephrase that, because I think the quality of care that has been administered to those who have been wounded with a 95-96% battlefield survivor rate, it's pretty hard to argue with the quality of care that they're getting. So I think that, again, focusing on best practices, focusing on what's working, find something that is worth your time and your effort and volunteer. There are many organizations out there that really need you. It's not just treasure, it is time too. So I apologize, because I don't know what your question was, but when I hear the word volunteer, I mean, I apply it to what we do and the amazing volunteers that we have.
If we could gain access, I have 1,000 operational excellence leaders that would find ways to cut costs and improve service at the VA, Tricare.
Actually, let's just say, do you have a quick question?
No, so how do we get connected?
Because you're considered a private organization, and that's something that frustrates us all. Throughout my entire time as the vice for 4 years, and I'm sure General Pace had similar experiences, that private organizations would come to us with one sole intent in mind, and that was to help wounded warriors. And it was very, very hard because of the ethics regulations for us to, in fact, be seen as favoring one private organization, even though it was solely directed at helping individuals, over another private organization.
And you can't fundraise.
I mean, I think Ken could tell you how difficult it was for him to get the process in place he has. The hardest thing in the world is to give the government anything. That
was my point, I think, that it's harder to volunteer than you think.
Yeah.
You said it better.
And by the way, the more we do, the less of an onus falls on the government. So what we do, we have to do well.
Gentlemen, I just want you to each wrap up, if you can, and some final thoughts on how we take what was announced today in this initiative and the research that is being carried out and what they want to happen, and how do you make that happen?
I learned a lot today. So one, there is research and it's accurate, it's data, and it came from the people who we're trying to serve. So that has tons of credibility with me. I learned a long time ago that none of us are as smart as all of us. And so I just challenge us all to take the data, take the challenges we have, and then go do something about it. And to your point, it can be one person, one at a time. But I'm walking away from here saying I've got much more informed, and that we have better data. We've got more facts to go actually treat or fix the problem, and we will do that as an organization.
I'll just say, if we look at what can we do with those sitting in the room, help us to fund the research, and then number one, and then number two, to be able to reach out to SVA chapters in your local community, ask to serve as mentors. A number of times it may be tough initially, because student vets are busy with families, they're older, but once you break down that barrier, first thing you realize is that they don't know the question to ask you, so you should come in with resources, with just saying, I'm here to help, to support, what is it that you need. So on a local level, that will certainly help the student vet to be empowered.
Ken.
1% of this nation raised their right hand and took an oath to defend this nation. And I think that we as Americans also need to raise our right hand and take an oath to take care of the military family, to take care of those who have given so much to this nation, whether it's a mental injury or a physical injury. Remember the military family. Do what you can to help employ our wounded. Do what you can to employ the blind. Do what you can to employ those in wheelchairs and so forth. Remember what sacrifices have been made on behalf of this nation.
I would like to build on President Bush's lost lead. Is that what you called it, Martha? Lost lead?
He buried the lead, yeah.
He buried the lead. That we end the stigma associated with these issues, whether it's depression, whether it's post-traumatic stress, whether it's traumatic brain injury, that when someone's suffering, that we create that kind of environment, and that's really what it means. It's creating the kind of environment in your own space, be that a large corporation or a smaller group of people, that tells people that it is perfectly all right to go and get treatment for these problems. That's absolutely critical. And by doing that, we will go a long way in helping the great group of people that are out there that really need to get some help. I'm sometimes criticized for wanting to drop the D. People say, I've talked to all kinds of people who are in treatment, and they say the D had no problem with the D at all being called a disorder. I said, well, that's the wrong group of people to talk to. You talk to the soldiers that come to me who say, listen, at 19 years old, I don't want to be told I have a disorder because I had to pick up my friend in pieces on the side of the road and put him in a body bag so I could bring him home. I don't want to be told I have a disorder because of that. I just think ending the stigma and getting folks in to get the help that we can give them, and over time improving that help, is what I hope we can all do.
And not only improving that help, but also educating the country to know that there is treatment for that, and they can be great contributors to society and the workplace. So we thank you very much, gentlemen, for those thoughts. We'll leave it up to you to connect those dots and to help others as well. Thank you.